We've been talking about relationships of different types over the past few weeks, and this evening we have the chance to talk about a specific type of relationship, which especially in our modern Western culture is taken to be extremely important. Of course, it's taken to be extremely important in every culture I know of, but ours has an unusual reverence for what we call romantic relationships. So in order to start this, I'd like to say that we often feel, think, say a great deal about this kind of relationship. This kind of relationship is very, very important to us. And two stories, I think, bring up a good perspective on how important we think it is, and therefore how much we add to it. So many of you got the email about this talk, and you may have noticed the two adjectives that were used to describe relationships as a sacred practice. So the residents, when they were writing up the email to describe this talk, used two adjectives. Does anyone remember what they were? Well, yes, I bet you do, but they were contentious and controversial. So relationships as a spiritual practice is a topic which for many of us is, and of all the words, consider all the words in the world that could have been chosen to describe that. Interesting that the two words were contentious and controversial. And I read that and thought, thank you, I think I'll start the talk with that. Because it shows how much we add on, how important this is to us, and therefore how tight we get around it. We get very uptight around these things. And so the point I'd like to make about that is please try to receive this talk like any other talk, like any other teaching that is given these Sunday evenings. The other story is that one of the community members wrote back about this topic and asked if, when we talk about romantic relationships, do we mean sexual relationships? Because couldn't we think of a romantic relationship as being the relationship we have with everyone, with everything? We have the phrase that you have a love affair with life, for example. And so, first of all, to clarify, this is a conversation about sexual relationships. When I wanted to talk about romantic relationships, that was absolutely included. And in fact is the core of what I'm going to talk about, although I'm not going to talk about sex itself as a spiritual practice and whether it could be, because different people also have very strong opinions about that. But on that side, unlike thinking of romantic relationships as being contentious, as inherently contentious, there's the other side of thinking, well, isn't this, which is very common in our culture, isn't this the quintessential form of love? Isn't this what real love really is? And other forms are faltering attempts at it. So romantic love, romantic relationships are neither quintessential love nor inherently contentious. Although it's important to note that there's a reason that we might think of both of those things. If we think about the contentious side, and we look at anything from ancient Buddhist texts to modern biological, evolutionary biology, explanatory mechanisms, it's important to know that while romantic relationships, sexual relationships indicate a kind of a partnership, we have a partnership. We're trying to do something together. Incidentally, let's face it, what is that thing that we're trying to do together? in a sexual relationship? Yeah, we're trying to reproduce. That's very important to know. And nowadays, I think we try to say, well, not really, sort of, but we're reproducing ourselves. That's what we're doing. And we're choosing a person who we think should be reproduced. Of course, I should be reproduced, but this person also should be reproduced. And so let's get together and reproduce ourselves. That's a lot of what's happening. And so it's good to face that, because while it's taken, of course, and it's true that there's a selfless side of romance, of sexuality, of reproduction. There certainly is that. There's also a selfish side. And what does that mean practically in terms of that relationship with a partner? It means that we often are in conflict with them, because we want them to do a lot of the work that then we don't have to do, so we can get going on other things. And so it's important to know that in a certain way we're partners, and in a certain way we're competitors. And if we don't enter the relationship with that knowledge, a lot of this can become very confusing. It can become very confusing why it's so common for us to have a hard time with each other. Statistics indicate that most forms of relationships with our parents, our colleagues, our siblings, our friends, as we get older, as time passes, as the relationship matures, we have more and more positive feelings about them on average. The same is not true of romantic relationships. On average, we have fewer and fewer positive feelings about our romantic partners. And that's highly significant. It's an exception to a general rule. And so, yes, there's a kind of contention in this sort of relationship, which is important to acknowledge. There's also a kind of competition, of course. We can't have romantic relationships with everyone in the way we can have universal compassion for everyone. We are choosing a certain person, or in some cases certain people, but very few. And in making those choices, we're choosing against everyone else. And we ourselves are not chosen sometimes when we would like to have been. And so, on that front, I'd like to make a strong point right up front, which I'm starting negative, but that's normal in a Buddhist tradition. We start negative. The negative point is romantic relationships are not designed to make you happy. The purpose of a romantic relationship is not to make you happy. And to take it further, I'll make a strong statement. You will never find anyone who will make you happy in this kind of relationship. Never. You will never find someone. And so if you're with someone and they're not making you happy, well, that's the best you're going to get. Just know that. In a certain way, you can see there's a positive spin to that, isn't there? Well, that's good. It's the best I'm going to get. No one will ever make me happy. This kind of relationship isn't set up to make me happy. It's not the point of it. It's not the purpose of it. And that's good to know, because a lot of the time for us, we want this kind of relationship to make us happy. We feel like, if you would just be a little different, or our relationship were a little different, then I would be happy. And it's just not true. That isn't where happiness comes from. If we look for it there, then we're going to be consistently disappointed. So, we're in a position where we're competing with each other. If you would do some more of the work, then everything would be better for me. Of course, we're partners. I'll do some of the work too, but maybe you could do a bit more than you're currently doing. Plus, if you would change a little bit, then I'd be happy also. So if your behavior and personality were different, then the world would be a better place. This is just a part of this kind of relationship, which we just have to face. We just have to look at that. We have to know that. And as I say, it's a pretty typical Buddhist approach to things, to try to take stock of the reality first, and then we can work on resolving it. We can work on trying to deal with that. So what about the other side? What about this other side of things? What about the side that, well, romantic love is really what it's all about? And this is a common message for us. This is, for your information, some of you may not know, but this is very unusual in world culture, that we would put up romantic love as some kind of a positive. Maybe you're aware of this. It's very recent. It came about in the Western world just over the past few hundred years. It used to be thought of, even in the Western world, and is thought of in most of the world as, do you know what? It's very commonly thought of as a mental illness. You're all aware of that, I suppose. This should be well known, because most cultures, and including the Western culture up until a few hundred years ago, considered romantic love, falling in love with someone, to be a kind of mental illness. Which, good news, you can get over it with the counseling of your parents and your friends who can help you to stop having that experience. Really, it was taken very seriously. Plato was the strongest proponent of this view that I know of, because he's the one who said it in those clear terms, that romantic love is that a certain kind of eros, because he talked about different kinds of this erotic love, and he said that there's a kind of erotic love that allows you to go beyond this falling in love, as we call it, experience, and that's very good. But if that's your experience, if that's the way you experience romantic love, then you have a mental disease, and you need help, and people can help you to get over it, and then you can get on with your life. That really changed quite a bit. What was the novel that was written about the married woman who fell in love with the monk? This is a very important novel. I meant to look it up earlier today, but I didn't have time. Well, that was a major turning point in our Western civilization. Of course, it didn't entirely create that shift. There are a lot of historical reasons for that shift. But then ultimately we continued on, and actually the first person I know of who put up romantic love not merely as not a bad thing, but actually a more sophisticated form was, in fact, Jane Austen. She's the first person I know of who spoke about it in that way through her characters. She used her characters to make that point in her novels. So we've come to this point now when we feel like, first of all, it's a great thing, and second of all, you can't really be happy without it. You can't really be happy. This is a common message in our culture, that you need a romantic relationship in order to be happy, in order to be whole, in order to truly experience the beauty of life. If you don't have that particular kind of partner, well then you're, well, incomplete and less than those who do. Again, this is very different. I myself have been in romantic relationships and have also committed over a long time in my life to celibacy. And in the monasteries where I trained, in Asia, where celibacy is taken to be the norm, it's also simply accepted that, of course, people who are celibate are happier than people in romantic relationships. Of course that's the case. Everyone knows that because romantic relationships are so much work. It's so difficult just to sustain them. Just to keep them going is hard. Much less to flourish in them and get to the point, perhaps, under those rare circumstances when you would actually support each other. This is very unusual. The chances aren't good for you if you get into a relationship that you're going to have such a good one. And even a good one, if you put that same amount of work into meditation that you have to put into the romantic relationship, then you'd experience much more happiness than any romantic relationship could ever give you. Incomparably more. You could experience more happiness in a day than the romantic relationship would give you in a lifetime. So this is the perspective. It's no longer the perspective. Nowadays we think of it as being the medicine, the savior of our lives. If you're not happy, then you need that. We have a phrase in our culture, actually, which is a shocking phrase for culture, which is called a healthy sexual relationship. People say that. And for a lot of people, they're simply shocked that, of course, there couldn't be a healthy sexual relationship. That's an inherently negative sort of relationship. As I say, it's contentious by nature. But we have that now, and we actually would say further that if you don't have that, then you're incomplete. You're less than those who do. So we've taken it to a certain limit, I think. We've taken it very far. Well, what's the truth in this? Because there's a lot of confusion in this, delusion. But I'd say there is some truth in this. There is a utility to this kind of relationship. And before I go on, consider the word I just used. Utility. There's a utility to this kind of relationship. It's not specific to this kind of relationship, but it can be developed in a certain way within this kind of relationship. And when I say utility, know that again, I'm attempting to make sure that this teaching is a teaching like any other. This isn't about me. It's not just about my experiences. It's not just about my attitudes about this. But I'm talking from a larger tradition. So attempt to take this in that way. When we're in relationships in general, we can make use of those relationships in order to fulfill what we, in our tradition, call our vow. What is it that we have set out to do in this life? What do we want to achieve in this life for the benefit of all beings? What's our medicine that we have to give to the world? Specifically, what is it that we want to provide? And what's the work that we want to do? Now, when I say, quote, the work we want to do, inherently, it's not entirely about what we want. It's about what the world needs. It's about what our innate capacities are. It's about the call of the Spirit directing us, guiding us, in order to be of our greatest benefit. So we talk about our vow, and relationships in general are very important for us in fulfilling our vow. No matter what our vow is, relationships remain important to us in fulfilling it. In terms of romantic relationships, of course, we think about them as sexual and that we're going to create a life. And that's one thing that may be part of our vow. That may be something that we do. And note that when we talk about that, when we talk about sexuality and creating a life, we're talking about the instance of greatest, most absolute power, equivalent to murder. We totally take power away from a person when we murder them. And we totally give power to someone when we give birth to them. This is an instance of our use of extraordinary levels of power. And in the same way, we should know that there's so much power in this that we also use this partner sometimes over our romantic partners. We have this intense power, and oftentimes sexual relationships get turned into power relationships, where we may force someone to have a sexual relationship with us, even though they don't want to, or we use our power to cause them to participate in that relationship out of a power dynamic that's unhealthy. And on the other side, we can trick someone into taking care, you could say, of our child, giving their life to that, rather than giving their life to something else, to their vow or to raising their own child, whatever it is. We can make use of our power in different ways over our partners, and of course that's used to give power to someone. And also note that once you give that kind of power to someone, once you give birth to someone, you've also murdered them. You've forced them to die. They have no choice anymore. They must now die. So this is big power that we're talking about. This is someone who you have now caused to suffer and die. It's a big deal. It's big stuff. How do we look at this? How do we look at a kind of relationship in which so much power is being exhibited day after day in so many different ways? How can we look at this in a useful way? Well, I'd like to give some general guidelines that I myself came up with about what's important in a romantic relationship. And it's important for us to look at these very closely and then examine ourselves in them. Now, in order to do that, I'd like to talk about the two stories from the two people who gave me my life, and therefore my happiness, my ability to fulfill my vow, to walk a spiritual path and experience a bliss that transcends even death, and also death. These are just a few of the things I've received from my parents. From my parents, I received this body, which for all of us is the one tool we have for walking this path. And for that alone, of course, I have no way, no practical way, no way through any care I were ever to give them. I could never repay their kindness for that, for the gift of this body. And that is just the beginning of what they gave me. Even if they hadn't given me anything else, or had given me a great deal of negative things, nonetheless, that gift alone would mean that I would experience gratitude for the rest of my life. But they gave me an education, they gave me support, they gave me care, they've given me wisdom, and I'm going to share a bit of their wisdom right now. I was talking to my father about a significant relationship I was in. I'm not going to get into the details of the relationship right now. It's very, very complicated, as relationships tend to be. It was not a sexual relationship, but it was a complicated relationship. And I had discovered that the person, and actually the people, it was a group of people, the people who I was working with, who I was relating to, who I was friends with, wanted me to treat them in a certain way, treat them as if they were less than me. It's a long story. But what I discovered over time was that if I did treat them that way, that they were a lot happier. Life was a lot easier for all of us if I just started talking down to them. If I treated them as if they weren't very intelligent or capable. Everyone was happier. I was happier, mainly because they were happier. Everyone could just relax. And I talked to my father about it, and I said, you know, Dad, I'm really growing up. I'm finally understanding how complicated the world is, and I'm seeing that sometimes it's important to treat people in ways that may seem hurtful out of practical ends, for the sake of practical ends. And he so kindly, so wisely said, you know, I've never done what you're doing. I've never been in the situation you're in. I've never maintained the kind of relationship that you're maintaining right now. So I don't know what you're going through, and I can't tell you what to do. But I can tell you what I've learned from my life. And what I've learned is this. Don't become what you hate. And I realized that that's exactly what I was doing. I was becoming what I hated. What practical end can justify that? And I saw none. There is no reason. I do not have to become what I hate, and I won't. And that moment, my life became a lot harder, and has been harder every day since. And I'm, as I say, enormously grateful for his willingness to make my life so much harder out of a belief that I could handle that. This applies also to romantic relationships. You're in a relationship with someone, no matter what they ask for, no matter who they are, no matter what they do, you don't have to become what you hate. It doesn't matter. And I would recommend to you, having learned this lesson myself, don't do it. Do not become what you hate. The second story is a recent story about my mother. There's a Buddhist text in which the various responsibilities in various directions and various kinds of relationships are described. Relationships between teachers and students, the relationships between parents and children, and the relationships between spouses, among others. And I mentioned this to her, and I was talking about it, saying there's this text, and wondering if I should give a talk on this text. It's very interesting and useful, but there are a lot of technical terms in it if you don't understand the background of certain things. And so I probably won't, but it's an interesting text anyway. And she was very interested in it and immediately asked the following question. What is the responsibility of a wife to her husband? Tell me that part first. That's the most interesting part to me. Isn't this amazing? Because I've told a lot of people about this text. And most people, let's say it's a wife who has a husband, say, most of them say, oh, interesting. Tell me about the responsibilities that a husband has to his wife. Or it's a child with their parents. Oh, interesting text. Can you tell me the responsibilities that a parent has to their child? Or it's a parent. Oh, what are the responsibilities the child has to their parent? She right away wanted to ask about her own personal growth, her own spiritual development. It's very impressive to me, very inspiring to me. And then, interestingly, I was kind of on a line in the conversation, and I finished the topic I was on. And as soon as she had another chance, she said, okay, great, now tell me the responsibilities that a wife has to her husband. I wouldn't be dissuaded from the intent to learn, to grow. This is what's offered to us. We're offered a person who can give us opportunity after opportunity to grow. They put us in a position in which growth is necessary, in which a lack of growth is untenable. And that's very kind. Of course, we can change them if we wish. And to a certain extent, of course, we can. We can use our power over them to change who they are. And if that happens, then our lives will be slightly easier and we won't be any happier. Or we can learn from them. We can learn from the difficulties they provide to us, in which case our lives will be slightly harder and we'll be much happier. Please know that this is the offering on the table in this kind of relationship. And so I'd like to give, from that perspective, 3 basic guidelines of how these relationships should unfold, because this is where it has to begin. It has to begin with these fundamental guidelines. And from these guidelines, there's a lot that can be said. We can talk about many, many things from here. But I believe it should start here. In terms of this kind of relationship, first guideline is, at the very least, everyone in it should feel and should really be physically safe. And I know it's sad that we have to start there. I know it's sad. It's unfortunate that it's so common in these kind of relationships that someone is not physically safe. That on the contrary, sometimes, too often, there's someone in that relationship who intentionally hurts the other, physically. It's very sad. I can tell you, from very intimate personal experiences, I can tell you that right now, right nearby, see all these houses right around here? Right now, someone is intentionally, physically abusing someone else in this kind of relationship. It's happening now, this evening, nearby. It's something we have to take very seriously, and we have to be certain that that is not happening in any of our relationships. To be careful about this. At the very least, that should be the case. But that isn't where we have to stop. That's where we have to start. We can take it further and come to the point where we feel safe together. And even further, where because of the relationship we love our bodies even more. We flourish in our bodies even more. Our bodies are healthier. And we can appreciate the miracle of this living organism, this precious life. None of us can understand what all of us are right now using. Our bodies can become a source of happiness, joy, and yes, security. It's essential that we take it to that level. That's our aim, that anyone we're with, we want them to have that experience. We never want them to feel unsafe. And every next day, we want them to have a better and better relationship with their physical body. So that's the first guideline. The second is, no one should ever feel emotionally unsafe. Our emotional bodies are also precious, and we shouldn't be abused emotionally either. Unfortunately, we often think of this as being abstract or unclear. Emotional abuse, what is it? Who knows? This isn't a good way to look at it. It's something that each of us can look at very closely in ourselves. Are we causing the person we're with to feel emotionally unsafe? Are we criticizing their emotional needs? Are we telling them that they should be stronger? I know, and for a lot of us in this practice, something that certainly happened to me, I know other people, where someone says something like, well, if you had a real practice, then you wouldn't feel this way. If you had a deep mindfulness practice, then you wouldn't feel these difficult emotions. It's important for us in this community to not look at it that way. And certainly in our romantic relationships, that we're constantly not only making sure they don't feel unsafe, but that actually the person feels more safe day by day. The person has a better and better relationship with their emotional body than they did the day before because of the work that we're doing in order to be of service to them, and that we ourselves are making sure that we're in relationships in which that's taking place so that increasingly our emotional bodies can flourish and can become a source of wisdom, which brings us to the third point, and that is that at the very least in this sort of relationship, we should not be preventing our partner, no one in the relationship should be prevented from fulfilling their vow, fulfilling their purpose in the world. That should not be happening, ever. Not for one day. Should never occur. And furthermore, we don't stop there, we just start there. Furthermore, the relationship should be a catalyst, should be a support, so that everyone in it increasingly does fulfill their vow. And in a relationship, this sort of relationship that will last, that vow is a shared project. That vow is something that is contributed to, is created by everyone in that relationship. And that then brings us to the point of, well, okay, so you started this talk by saying that romantic relationships are basically terrible. Why would you be in one? And from a certain perspective, which may or may not be yours, but from a certain perspective, the reason is that that kind of relationship, for some people, under some circumstances, can be the best way, and in fact, for many of us, the necessary way in order to, that we can use to fulfill our vow. That's part of our karmic affiliation. That's part of our built-up dedication in our lives. And so we find someone who can help us to do that, and for whom we can help do that, and gradually it becomes one vow. Of course, we're different people still, we have different opinions, but we are enabling each other and partnering in fulfilling our purpose and making sure that we give to the world what the world needs and what we have to offer. And so more and more as time goes on, we learn about this person, they learn about us, and we become more and more capable of achieving that. Of course, this is true in any relationship. But again, this kind of relationship is one that has the basic purpose of creation, producing something. And so we produce our vow. We produce our offering, our medicine to the world, and can partner with and trust someone if we wish and if that's appropriate in order to give that offering to the world. This approach allows us to overcome the unfortunate, contentious tendencies of a romantic relationship. Because our vow was never about me in the first place. Our vow is a thing that allows a person to transcend themselves and offer themselves to the world. And so it inherently disables the competition, the sense of trying to get more out of the other person than we want to give. Because the purpose of the relationship is actually to get everything out of us. That's what the relationship is for. How can this relationship take everything from me before I die? So that the world has all of it. That my entire life has been given as an offering. Here's a person who can help me to do that. And good news, I'm here for you also. I also can help you to become nothing. In that way, we can use a romantic relationship as a sacred practice, as an offering, as something that is such a support to each other and ourselves that allows us to transcend, let go of each other and ourselves. We can make use of these guidelines, I think, in order to be caring, in order to be productive in this kind of relationship. So, let's settle into a practice, to a technique, in order to clarify this point, so that more and more, if we wish to engage in this kind of relationship, we're capable of using it as a tool that uses us. Take a moment to settle into your physical body. Pay attention to physical body sensations. Pay close attention with curiosity to whatever you're feeling in your physical body. What are the physical sensations That might be the physical sensation of the texture of your clothes on your skin. That's a physical type body sensation. Might be the temperature of the room. Perhaps you're a bit hungry, that feeling in your stomach. Maybe you have an ache in your body to feel that. Is a instance of a physical type body sensation. Or the pleasant, relaxing feeling of your breath as it comes in and out of your nose or mouth, or the rise and fall of your abdomen. Pay attention to physical type body sensations. As you pay attention to physical body sensations, establish a sense of safety. A sense of safety. The safety of your own physical body. This has two components. One is that you affirm that if there is some body sensation it's indicating to you that your body is not safe, that you need to take some action in order to take care of your body, you affirm that you will do that. Affirm to yourself, to your own body, that you will do that. You feel a kind of pain that indicates that you need to take a certain action. Perhaps simply move, perhaps change your lifestyle, your diet or exercise, and perhaps go to a professional to receive assistance. That if you feel something in your body that indicates your body isn't safe, isn't healthy, needs care, that you will respond to that. Affirm that. Or if you're in a situation that's damaging your body. For example, if you're in a romantic relationship in which you're being hurt, affirm to yourself that you will get out of that situation. You'll change the situation, transform it, or escape from it. And as you affirm this, attempt to bring forth a sense of being proud of yourself, a sense of celebration. That you are trustworthy in this way regarding your own body. Feel proud of yourself, happy, excited, rejoice. You've become an example for others. And you become secure within your own life in this particular way. And the second affirmation is that the body sensations that are arising themselves are safe. That you won't attack, abuse, neglect, ignore, repress. The direct experience in your physical body right now. That the experiences you're having are acceptable. They are accepted. They're received fully. This can be very confusing to us because pain can arise because of a situation. It's confusing to us that sometimes we need to change the situation, fight against the situation, without fighting against or trying to change the pain. This is very confusing to most of us. But in fact, if we fight against the pain, we'll lose the information that's telling us to fight against the situation. It's by accepting how we feel that we can take action. Too often, we deny how we feel. But that prevents us from being active and compassionate to ourselves and others. So in the same way that we affirm that if we're in an unsafe physical situation, we will take action to change that, to escape from it, we affirm that whatever we're feeling right now, we will not fight against it. We'll accept it, receive it. Come to understand the wisdom in it. Pay close attention to this. Affirm that whatever you're experiencing right now, you're willing to experience it fully. While you affirm that experience may indicate to you that you have to change the thing that's making you feel that way. Practically, this means whatever sensation you're experiencing, if it's a pain, an itch, or a pleasant sensation such as relaxation, whatever it is, you will experience it fully without contention right now. And then practice that. This is the feeling of sitting on a chair. I receive that completely. This is the feeling of breathing. I receive that completely. This is the feeling of an itch or an ache. We say yes. We feel it completely without repressing or ignoring. In a moment, I'll ring the bell, and for just a few minutes, we'll have the chance to walk around, move about the space, if that seems useful. If you do get up and move around, please be back within about 3 minutes, and continue as you move to do this exercise. To continue with these 2 affirmations that you will keep your body safe and that you will experience the sensations that your body is providing without resistance. As we continue with this exercise, we'll stay with the same technique but shift our focus. Bring your attention to your emotional body sensations. What are you feeling emotionally? Of course, you may have a sense of happiness or sadness, gratitude or shame, anger or humor. There are many emotions. And in the same way that when we attend to physical type body sensations, we may not feel much of anything at a given time. When we attend to emotional type body sensations, we may not feel much of anything there either. And if you have a sense of emotional peace, which is to say a lack of any emotional content, then feel that. But bring your attention to your emotional body experience, whatever that is right now. Including, perhaps, the lack of any particular emotional content. We can feel that also. Simply look into and investigate whatever you're feeling emotionally right now, including emotional peace. And as you pay attention to your emotional body, affirm two things. The first is that if you're in a situation in which you're emotionally unsafe, affirm that you will get out of that situation, which you're being emotionally abused or neglected. Affirm that you'll take care of your emotional body at that time. Now, that may be by changing the situation, and it may be by leaving the situation. But in any case, you'll care for yourself emotionally. Affirm that. And second, affirm that whatever your emotional experience is, whatever emotions or lack thereof are arising right now, that you will accept that you will feel that, you'll receive that without resistance or contention. If you're feeling happy, then you'll allow yourself to feel happy. If you're feeling sad, you'll allow yourself to feel sad. If you're angry, you'll allow yourself to feel angry. If you're grateful, you'll allow yourself to feel grateful. If you're feeling peace, you'll allow yourself to feel peace. If we're in a situation that makes us afraid, too often we resist the feeling of fear, rather than resisting the situation. It's by not resisting the fear and feeling it fully that we realize we need to change the situation. This point is very confusing for us. This is a time to explore it. Affirm that you'll take care of yourself emotionally and that you will fully feel each emotion as it arises right now. Very good. And now, in our last few minutes, stay with your body. Use your body. Utilize your body to explore your vow, your purpose, your place in the world. Pay attention to your physical and emotional body, in particular your emotions, in order to come to further clarity about your vow in this life. The way that you'll know that you lost track of your body is that you'll start paying attention to thoughts. So you'll ask, what should I do with my life? And an image of you doing something will arise, or a statement will arise. I should do this. You'll see yourself doing that. Those aren't body experiences. So set those aside for now. They have their value. Body experience isn't the only experience of wisdom, but for now, set that aside. And use your body to explore it without going into your head. Feel. Feel. Feel your vow. Once again, beware of any thoughts, concepts, explanations, descriptions. Set all that aside. Feel your vow. a time for questions, conversation, reports, discussion. Anything is fine. The floor is yours. I should let you know that I'm a person who's unusually comfortable with silence. So if there's silence for a while, it's fine with me. I think for most people, silence is a little uncomfortable. Bunch of people in a room together, nobody's talking, it feels like something's wrong. I think we often associate that with anger, actually. People sitting together without talking, usually they're angry with each other. Well, we're not angry with each other. We're just enjoying the reverberations of the meditation. So, enjoy. And feel free to talk if you'd like.
The idea of feeling nothing equals feeling peace is a nice concept.
Mm-hmm. Did you have that experience?
I did.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Teaching that experience.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, a lot of the time we, especially when we're invited to experience emotion, nothing comes up, no particular emotion comes up, and we forget that we could feel that. Somehow we knew that no emotion came up. So we say, I didn't feel anything. It's not true. We felt something. We felt emotional peace. We felt a lack of emotional content. And that experience of emotional peace isn't necessarily good, but most of the time it is. Most of the time it's a very pleasant experience. Which is then fascinating, isn't it? It's fascinating that there's a kind of good, pleasant experience that isn't emotional. Fascinating. That's prior to emotion.
And I would say, from my own experience, that perhaps that feeling of peace or that openness sometimes is scary.
Mm-hmm.
You tend to run to something else because you think that that's not good.
Exactly. This is what's so fun about exploring emotional experience. So I really appreciate the sentence you just said. It was very intelligent. Okay? Please be clear on the fact that it was intelligent. There's a kind of emotional wisdom that you just said, right? There's a kind of clarity in that that's worth looking at. So you just talked about three different things, right? The lack of emotional experience, the presence of emotional experience, and the activity of going away from the emotional experience and the emotional peace. So what was the emotional experience that you were trying to get away from?
That's a good question.
It is. And it's a difficult one to answer. Would anyone like to give it a shot? What was the emotional, none of the residents, please. What was the emotional experience that was just described clearly? Was it an experience of? Yes, you could say that the peace is a kind of emptiness. That's right. So that's an emotional experience. Or you could say it's It's a lack of emotional content, which is still a kind of emotional experience, or you could say something prior to emotional experience. But it's felt with the emotional body. And then once we have that experience, we have often, sometimes, for some of us, we have another experience, which is emotional content, and that is the emotional content of, yes? Fear. Exactly. So you described an emotional experience of fear. Yes? So you first had a lack of emotional experience, and then you had a presence of emotional experience. Yes? Oftentimes we don't notice that there was a presence of fear. We immediately search elsewhere without noticing that all that happened was that we went from having an experience of emotional peace to having an experience of emotional content, specifically fear. We don't notice that. But in fact, an emotion arose, fear. And we can stay with the technique to notice, peace, peace, fear, fear, peace, fear, sadness, happiness, fear, more fear, and happiness. And we discover that we may not have even been afraid of that emotional piece. It may just be that fear arose. Because that happens in our emotional bodies. Emotions arise. Not always in response to the situation that we may think that they're responding to. Sometimes there's just sadness that's related to something that may have happened years ago, and we come into contact with it. But we often think, the thing I just was experiencing is what made me sad, afraid, happy, grateful, without noticing how very subtle and rich our emotional experience is. It's important to appreciate the extraordinary amount of information, of knowledge that's held in our emotional bodies. Much more than is held in our rational minds. It doesn't mean, of course, that our emotional bodies are right. It's so rich that it's often very confused. Much more confused than our rational minds. Yes? Our rational minds tend to be right about less more. And so that's why it's so fortunate that we have a body and a mind. They can help each other out. Our bodies can remind our minds that things are more complicated than we think, and our minds can remind our bodies that things are simpler than we feel.
I would add that the rational mind can undermine intuition.
Yes, exactly.
Exactly. Becoming, non-peace.
Exactly.
Worry.
Exactly. Yep. And a lot of this practice is about shifting from our bodies and our minds contending with each other, that we have a kind of wisdom in our bodies, we have a kind of wisdom in our minds. Oftentimes they seem to be in conflict, and so they detract from each other, so they undermine each other. Why? Because we haven't gone through the process, which this practice allows us to do, among other things, but this practice is one very effective way of seeing that it isn't that our minds and our bodies are conflicting with each other, it's that our minds and our bodies are complementing each other. Our minds see things in a certain way, our bodies see things in a different way, and together we can see things in a more complete way. Their disagreement is evidence of their need for each other, not for the need for them to fight with each other. It's very important for us to see that, because our minds do undermine our intuition. But at the same time, our intuition can undermine our rational understanding of things. And it's very important for us to make use of all the kinds of wisdom that are present in us, whether that's in our minds or our bodies. And this exercise was specifically about our bodies. what is the wisdom in our bodies? So hopefully that was helpful. Just a second, sorry. Did you want to say something?
I had a question.
Related or unrelated?
Yeah, it's related.
Yeah, please.
If peace has no content,
Yes.
how can it feel good?
That's the mystery, isn't it? Isn't it amazing? It's a really important exploration. That's what I was saying. It's so mysterious. Deeply, it's very strange. And notice that I didn't say that peace has no content. Right? I didn't say that. Does anyone remember what I said? Unless I'm wrong and we can check the recorder to prove me wrong, and then I'll give you an ice cream cone that's vegan. But do you remember what I said? What did I say? It lacks emotional content. Now, so the full question is, how can something feel good if it lacks emotional content? That's a very important question. But I think just phrasing it that way may have clarified it for you. Is that true?
No.
Okay, very good. Can you clarify then what remains confusing?
Well, something feeling good is emotional content.
Uh-huh. Must it be?
Well,
Yes.
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 As far as I can tell.
Right. This is a big question. Actually, it goes further than that, because I was a few years ago in a big debate, big fight, contentious debate with two other advanced teachers of this practice, okay? And they were making the claim that that emotions are it. So it isn't only that everything that feels good is emotional. It isn't only that. It goes further than that. It's that everything that looks good is emotional. So if something looks beautiful, the way you know it is always that your emotions tell you that. Something can't just look beautiful. Something can't just taste good. You have to have the emotional experience that corresponds to that pleasant taste. That's how you know it's pleasant, because of your emotional reaction. And furthermore, they actually took it further than that, which was that we talk about resisting things, right? Talk about resisting pain, for example. That pain arises and we resist it. Or pleasure arises and we grab onto it. We may see something that we don't want to see, and so we resist that experience. We may see something we do want to see, so we grab onto it. Does that make sense? They were saying that all of that resistance or clinging is emotional in nature. And I was saying, no, it's not true. On the contrary, you're right within your eyes. Before it's become emotional, your eyes are already discriminating between pleasant and unpleasant. Your ears are already discriminating between pleasant and unpleasant, and your body, even before it becomes emotional, is already discriminating between pleasant and unpleasant before it becomes emotional. And so it's important to clarify two things about this point. One is the meaningless side of this disagreement. Okay? Oh, by the way, all three of us are very close friends. We were actually teaching a retreat together. We had a great time. But when you have a great time with people, you can successfully disagree with them. When you have a really good relationship, then you can argue about things in a productive way. And I think that's actually a measure of how much love we have for each other, right? How fully can we disagree without the friendship collapsing? In fact, sometimes disagreements increase the depth of love for each other, gratitude for each other. So we had that kind of relationship. So that's why I was smiling when I said I had a big fight with them, because it's something to smile about. So the meaningless side, which we clarified is very important to clarify, is simply, well, what do you mean when you say emotion? What's the definition? Because if you define emotion as the difference between pleasant and unpleasant, then every instance of discriminating between pleasant and unpleasant between a good feeling and a bad feeling is always emotional, just because you define it that way. Does that make sense? So part of it is that. Is that the way we want to define emotion? We want to define emotion as the ability to discriminate between a good and bad experience. Does that make sense? If we want to define it that way, then okay. If that's how you're defining emotion right now, then yes, I agree with you. There is no good experience other than an emotional experience. Okay? Do you want to define it that way?
No.
So if we don't define it that way, then it's much more rich. It's much more interesting to me. Because I would say that when we consider emotion, we're talking about a very specific kind of body experience. It's specific, and it's something that we can explore and come to know more and more over time. It can take a long time, years. I'm still learning more and more about my emotional experience after doing this practice for decades. For doing this practice as my full-time job for decades. There's more and more that I discover, more and more subtlety, especially in terms of causality. Causality turns out to be very complex in the emotional realm and in fact every realm, but certainly within the emotional realm. I brought up that point earlier in the past, previous conversation. So I'd say that as we explore emotion, we find that it is a specific kind of body sensation, and that the way that I would demonstrate logically that you can have a good or bad experience, good or bad, a pleasant or unpleasant experience that is independent of emotional experience, okay, is simply by asking, well, how do you know which emotions are pleasant and which are unpleasant?
Well, that's a question I haven't been able to answer.
Yes.
But it feels something like
Uh-huh.
lightness versus heaviness.
Uh-huh.
Expansiveness versus contraction.
Uh-huh. Yep.
That's my best attempt to articulate it, but it seems like it falls short.
Oh, it certainly falls short, but this is going to fall short. It's not because you're failing. It's because the medium is insufficient. So, of course, it's going to fall short. We're going to try to talk about this. And because, of course, if I wanted to, I could just push you and say, well, how do you know that lightness is more pleasant than heaviness? How do you know that expansion is more pleasant than contraction? Blah, blah, blah. But I think that actually starts to miss the point. We start to just get caught up in how words work. You're talking about something specific right now. And I would say that thing that you're talking about, in a practical way, because we've chosen not to define emotion in a way that more or less ends the conversation. It gives us a sense of clarity, even though we just produce that clarity with words rather than finding something that is clear, an insight that clarifies the situation. That would be my suggestion if we just define it so simply. But I say that the thing that you're referring to, and I know it may be hard to understand what's being referred to here because it's so vague. Lightness, it's light, not heavy. It's expansive, not contractive. What is the thing? Try to understand what he's talking about, because I think, as far as I can tell, you're actually talking about something very clear, just hard to put into words. But it's a direct experience for you. I think a lot of us have had this. So that thing that we're talking about, the thing that is pleasant, yes? I'd suggest that very thing could at times tell us that this experience of anger is very unpleasant. And that very same thing at other times would tell us this same emotional experience is pleasant. And therefore, there's a kind of knowledge that's prior to the emotions that allows us to perceive the emotions as pleasant or unpleasant differing depending on the circumstance, and in particular, I'd say their utility. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So that's my logical demonstration, which is just logic and has the same insufficient quality as what you were already describing. But maybe it's helpful to point us in the direction of seeing something or feeling something.
That thing,
Yes.
as far as I can tell.
Yes, please. Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
what we're talking about here, the primal seat of judgment.
Yeah. That's well said. That's good. Yes?
Seems to always be.
Uh-huh. Mm-hmm. Yep.
If I look close enough, I can always find it.
Yeah. Yep. Yep. Refine it. Get rid of every part of it that isn't always there. Anything else? Yes.
So I was just sort of, kind of processing
Oh,
your
right. Go ahead. Sorry, I forgot this gentleman over here, but please go ahead. Yes.
your lecture, and I was sort
Yeah.
of thinking about the whole thing with kind of emotion and instinct, and
Mhm.
like thinking around relationships, and I mean part of me, I think I have heavy there's some sort of probably evolutionarily put their drive that sort of emotionally says something's wrong when you're not in a relationship. And over about 6 years of not being in a relationship, I've been sort of going through that using, mindfulness approaches and other kinds of things. And I just noticed it's a surprisingly durable phenomenon that exists. And I'm not exactly sure what it is that I'm perceiving. Although I ultimately do want to be in relationships, I don't really want to be in them out of negative reinforcement. So it's something that's sort of on my mind.
Yeah, really smart. Really smart. You bring up a very sensitive topic. Do you mind if I ask you a rather direct question about it?
Sure.
Are you certain that if that durable experience were gone, you would still want to ultimately be in a romantic relationship?
I think it would then depend more on the sort of primary value of that relationship versus at any given time I might not always want to be in one.
Great.
And I think subjectively I don't always want to be in one, because if I really wanted to be in one, just at writ large I would be in one.
And so it's not as durable as it looks.
Yeah, it's there as a phenomenon, and it's there as something in my mind that's sort of structuring my cognitive process, but it's not something that's insurmountable in a certain way of like living around that, but and at certain points some of it sort of can be let go of, but there are just different like layers of it that keep like showing themselves up, and it does largely tend to change actually being in a relationship too. So it's not completely illusory that that goes away, but that doesn't mean that the other parts of being in a relationship make it actually overall beneficial to be in one in the long term in certain situations. So
It's well said. We have this recorded. You might want to listen to what you just said.
How do you get the recording?
Yeah. We'll talk about that after,
Okay.
but you might want, I don't have anything to add to what you just said, but you might want to listen to that. We all may want to just review what was just said there. There's a lot of clarity in that. Daryl, do you want to finish this off for us?
Great. Another super talk story. It's like an alternative universe. It's always so interesting. Romantic love. You said that no person can make me happy. A piece of it for me, though, is if I'm with someone who honors who I am, supports that, champions that, believes in me so that I can believe in myself, and helps me to achieve to my potential, then that's cool. In that sense, there is that partnership.
Mm-hmm.
You followed that with the notion that if I'm with someone that's emotionally abusive, that I need to look at that, whether that suppression is in a relationship, at work, a neighbor, a friend. And it's sort of a paradox. The more chronologically gifted I become, the more I don't want drama, and the more I see it. Life's too short. But the paradox is this: we come into this world alone. We leave alone. We are alone. Yet it's also interrelated. It's all so much a function of interacting with other people. What we create, what we do, who we do it with. So it's kind of like an aloneness, yet a real togetherness.
Mm-hmm. Again, I don't have anything in particular to add to that. It's beautifully said. Is the sharing of wisdom what you were doing? Because I didn't hear a question. I don't have anything to add other than yes. Yes, you're right. Yes.
Just kind of wrestling with that person can't make me happy.
Yeah.
Yet, there's that other side to it. And then the
What's the other side?
Well, is it a good fit? Is it someone I'm compatible with? Is it someone that helps me to be the person I can be and allows for that creativity?
Mm-hmm.
And is that making me happy, or is it just allowing me to make myself happy? That's all. But the real grappling is the aloneness versus the interconnectedness. That nobody can make me happy, yet my happiness is the result of all these interactions.
Yes. And yet, doesn't that make sense? Isn't it what you just said? Where is the grappling? Where's the conflict in that? No one can make you happy, and your happiness is the result of friendship. Where's the conflict there?
Well, the no one can make me happy makes it sound to me like I'm alone. I'm doing it on myself, on my own.
Well, but what if
look to others for my happiness?
But what if no one can make you happy, including you?
Then I'm SOL.
What if no one could make you happy?
No one.
Well, yeah, you could play with it. It's a clever playful. I like it. Poetic. We can play with the words in that way and say, no, one can make you happy, but maybe a relationship could. That's a good way to look at it. I like it. Little heady, but I like it. But you could actually go deeper than that, and I have to skip over since we have no time left. But what if there's just no way that anyone, you, anyone else, could ever make you happy? What would that mean, given that you experience happiness? What is it that causes the happiness if no one can do it? And I'd prefer to just leave that as a question, because there's...
My answer would be living in present time.
Yes. So that is significant. And if you're in present time and you're with someone, then there you are. And if you're alone, then there you are. Yes? It's a completely different approach to life. It's a spiritual approach to life. Because the specific content of this moment isn't the ultimate point. The presence with this moment is the ultimate point. That's a radical shift. And this practice allows us to make that shift. If you're alone, be completely alone. If you're in a relationship, be completely in a relationship. But notice that the happiness comes from the completely, not the aloneness or the relationshipness. And that has a lot of significance to what you said as well. So we got to finish there. Sorry. Fun stuff. Maybe we'll have a part 2. Who knows? Didn't get into the more juicy sides, so. But I may not. I'm not promising anything. Yes.